Good afternoon. We appreciate that each of you have joined us, and today we're going to talk about the Kentucky Academic Standards and the alternate assessment targets for social studies. So we have Kim Sargent with us, who is our instructional specialist, and she's joining us from KVEC, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Kentucky Academics for Social Studies and what that looks like for alternate assessment. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kim Sargent, again, our social studies instructional specialist at KVEC, and she's going to talk to us about social studies.
Thank you, Dion. We'll just jump right in here, you guys, because I know it's been a long day and want to make this as easy and pleasant for you guys as I possibly can. My basic goals, and you guys can see here, is your experience today. I think that sometimes, anytime we talk about the standards, but I think especially when we talk about the alternate assessment standards, it all feels like that there's just so much information and so much processing that you kind of feel like you're trying to drink from a very large fire hose. But hopefully we're going to make that just a little bit easier for you guys today. Just a little over 3 years ago, we got these new standards. So kystandards.org is the best place to go get anything and everything when it comes to the standards. I think that and with these standards, there is an instructional shift. And we're going to talk a little bit about that instructional shift today, because especially with your kids, I think that this is a shift that is really, it's going to be much easier for you to process and then to communicate those social studies standards. So, being on the standards writing team, obviously, I'm going to be just a little bit biased, but other folks have looked at them, especially once you get past the little bit of an instructional shift. Once you get past that, the standards, folks, by and large, are really enjoying them because they're actually putting students, we're kind of sharing the ride with the students now. As before, we were the parents or whatever driving, and they were in the back seat and pretty passive, but now they're kind of like our co-pilot. So obviously I'm going to like that a lot more as a social studies teacher. So we're going to first look at the architecture. So you'll notice that I'm going to talk about things by asking questions first. And that is, again, part of this instructional shift. We're not going to just sit here and listen to me talk today. There's going to be a couple of times, 3 possibly, that we're going to be first looking at, the inquiry practices, and you guys are going to be active participants in everything. So Chastity's going to be real busy at times with the chat. So let's first look at the architecture of the standards. So when you look at the architecture of our standards, we actually have a graphic. So what I would love for you guys to do right now, and you can open up those, your chat to kind of put that in there. If you would rather open up your mic, that's great too. But looking at the standards like this, especially for you guys, and especially if you're a new teacher, you may look at this and say, this is pretty confusing. But what do you think that you know based on this graphic organizer about our social studies standards? And I'll just quietly sit here and kind of wait for the chat and or for you to open up your mic. But I want to first give you a chance to look at it. So take about 30 seconds to process that. I don't expect any responses yet. Yeah, about 15 seconds looking at it. You got 15 more, and I do time. About 10 seconds. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what do you think you know or feel that you know about our standards by looking at this graphic? And remember, there's no wrong answers. It's just us hanging out talking about this. So think of this as just like an extended PLC. So there's no judgment. It's just discussion and learning together and collaborating. That's all. So what do you guys know about our standards?
Kim, I'm not real familiar with the social studies standards, but I do know that one I think is really interesting, that how the social studies and the reading and writing standards can be taught, simultaneously and can be used together.
So what did you see on ours that made you think that, Chastity? So we'll kind of talk about this out loud so everybody else can hear the conversation. When you looked at this graphic, what told you that we could do reading and writing with this?
Well, the first one that sticks out is using evidence, because when,
Yeah.
in informational text,
Mhm.
when you cite the evidence and listing,
Mhm.
when you make that. So that one was the one that really stuck out to me. And um,
What about communicating?
well, that's like that, and I was looking at that one as well. And I think the communicating the claims, once, I think if you explain a little bit, like, because when we talk about that
Mhm.
in reading and writing, it's a different
Mhm.
term, but it's the same concept. So I think that would be, when we talk about that, that will be another area that could be
Mhm.
used.
Absolutely. So I don't want you guys to be intimidated by this process. Sometimes we can look at this and we're like, so let me go on to the next one so I can just kind of communicate. I'm going to use that word again. What our standards look like. So in Kentucky, we have two types of standards now. And one thing I want to emphasize about communicating claims and using evidence, when Chastity was talking, I thought about this. In the past, when you guys would work with your students, or if you've never worked, or if you were a student, because some of you are, most of you, many of you are probably young enough that you really only know the social studies standards as a student. So, but when we look at this, most of the time in the past, it was questioning and investigating, and that was it. This was the side of the circle that we stayed on. It was all about learning. You don't really remember ever using evidence in a social studies classroom, because probably what you did is memorize things and spit that out on a piece of paper. So let's talk about what that looks like to your students. Let's talk about their skill level, and then all the other things that they have to overcome, or that you have to do to help them within the content, within the disciplines. And what is great about this is about using evidence, not memorizing things. So when you get students, and that's something that you do every day in reading and writing, when you get those students involved in text and you ask them a question, they answer it, and you'll say, how do you know that? Show me. Where did you hear that? Where did you see that? Social studies has finally caught up with all the other disciplines, because science is like that now, obviously reading and writing. And I don't ever talk about math, because I'll leave that to the great and wonderful Stephanie Kidd. So you will only hear me reference math one more time in this experience. Um, so when we look at this and we think about, what it is that we have to do in social studies, you guys are going to see down here, you see the civics, geography, economics, and history. There is a time that we talk about this, and it's during this phase of investigating. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into this later, but this increased circle, okay, there is an expectation within our standards that when we interact with these down here, and you guys know the alternate assessment targets, when you interact with these disciplines, there is a process by which we do it, which takes us to this. Those top circles, because if we're going to get students to learn, we want them to use questions. And I'm going to do that with you guys in just a little bit. You're going to see that. Notice how this started up with, what is the architecture of the Kentucky academic standards? So if I asked you that question now, some of you could actually tell me some of those things, because learning is all about going to a question. What is that big goal that you want to learn? When you just walk in and look at the kids and say, today, guys, we're going to learn about community helpers. Well, some of your kids may not know, what community helpers are or what a community is. And so building from there will be hard. But if you looked at them and asked them a question, they're at least going to start thinking of the answer, because we have to remember, concepts are for teachers and questions are for learning, or questions for students. And I think that's something else that I think is so much more equitable about our social studies standards now, is they're asking kids to learn the way that they've always learned. Because if you'll think about it, kids always ask questions, they always have questions. So that is um, a mental process that is very, very natural to all students. So now that we've looked at the architecture of the standards, so what are the inquiry practice standards? And we're just going to look at these briefly. So I want you guys to get ready, okay? Look it up here. Seeing about how many we've got. So I'm going to leave these open. I'm going to ask y'all. Chastity did a great job on the architecture, but what I would love for you guys to be able to do is to look at each section of these. We're just going to go over this part very, very quickly, because we're only together today for an hour anyway. But I definitely want to give time at the end so I can go through the lesson kind of slowly, but most importantly, to give you guys the opportunity to ask questions. So when we talk about the inquiry practices, all of this is just good teaching, okay? This is nothing that's really been thrown at teachers that's new. The one thing that is new for us in social studies, like I mentioned a moment ago, really is the using evidence component. We're going to ask our students something that reading teachers and writing teachers even have done for a very long time. This is going to be a skill that very much supports the reading and the writing standards that you guys have to interact with. When you think about, like especially the lesson that we're going to talk about later, you're going to see that interaction again with that. So this is something that you're going to ask your kids to do. Now you have another opportunity to do it. So let's look at the first one, questioning. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one so I can tell you guys. If we're going to identify 2 to 3 big takeaways from each section of this: the questioning, investigating, using evidence, and communicating conclusions. So I'm going to do the top one, questioning, really quickly. In our social studies standards, and you're going to see those today, and that's why we're talking about that, is you have 2 types of questions, and that is compelling and supporting. So when we talk about compelling questions, look at the second sentence here. They're open-ended, enduring, and centered on significant unresolved issues. Well, I'm going to use a different phrase there because we understand the populations that we deal with, all of us, every grade level. And that is, compelling questions are big questions. Compelling questions, interestingly enough, can really get to things that kids want to know. Like, I'm going to go ahead and tell you our compelling question for today. So if you want to jot this down on a piece of paper to remember this, and by the way, the only thing you need today is a piece of paper because we're going to use both sides. I wanted to keep that really simple today. I didn't want you to have to shuffle through multiple pieces of papers or print a lot of things off before we met, because I really wanted you to come into this kind of cold, but very slow and very easy. Because this kind of social studies is very different from the social studies that you encountered as a student. Okay. So questioning has 2 types, compelling and supporting. Compelling questions are big questions. And the compelling question that we have today that I want you guys to write down is, I believe I have to remember to think back now, how does the government help us? So compelling questions are your big questions. They are the questions that organize your units. And ultimately, at the end of that unit, you and your students can produce products that show how they developed understanding around that big question or the open-ended question. Your students probably, to a large degree, are very familiar with open-ended because we talk about those all the time. So think about it. Compelling questions are open-ended, and they're those big, enduring questions. So in order for our students to answer compelling questions daily, we interact with supporting questions. And like it says here, can be answered through the use of concepts and practices of each social studies discipline. In other words, supporting questions are your daily instructions, or excuse me, your daily questions that is your instruction. So one day in our lesson, again, I'm still in my own thunder all over the place, but our supporting question one day is going to be, what is the Constitution? Because we need our kids to kind of develop an understanding around that. So your compelling question organizes your unit. Your supporting question organizes daily instruction. So I'm going to pause there for just a second and kind of let you guys process that. If you have a question, that would be great. Pop it into the chat or open the mic. Either one, I think that would be great. But when we think about that, as you guys can see here, the questioning inquiry practice is coded as Q. So there's nothing different except that we're going to actively use a question to organize our whole unit. And we're going to know that everything our students produce, everything that we do with our students for that unit is always going to come back to that question. What I tell teachers, and I have some teachers that do this, but this would be phenomenal for your students so that they have a visual that they can look at, or even if you want to make this in some way kind of tactile, however it is that the student stores, their learning and that kind of thing. It can be a series of pictures. It can be anything that you want that to be. But for one teacher that I have, as they encounter different sources, they put those up under their big question that's at the front of the room. Like in our case, it is, how does the government help us? So that's the big question. So each time that we use a source to understand that, or to understand that daily question, when we encounter it, what she does is that she takes a copy of it and puts it right there at the front of the room. So the kids can constantly see this so they can make all those references. Okay, so that's questioning. So let's look at investigating. So what does it mean to investigate? So I want to ask you guys, before we even go into this thing, what does investigate mean to you? So just one or two of you, that would be great. Put that in the chat. What does it mean to investigate in your own definition?
We do have a response, Kim, a couple of responses. So
Yay!
It's to find evidence of what you're looking for, to find a solution to a question.
Yeah, I love that.
Gathering
It looks like there was
clues
homework.
and trying to organize data.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Now you guys are using a lot of science terms. You're kind of intimidating me a little bit, but that's okay. Well, I'll muddle through on this one. But you're right. You're absolutely right all the way around. How cool is this? Social studies, I don't know how to tell you guys this. I get really excited saying it. Social studies is fun now. Whereas the past, it felt really boring. I don't know about you guys, but I know I did this in my classroom. I always felt like I was just searching for resources or searching for a source to teach a concept. But you're not doing that anymore. You're answering a question. And you're going to find as teachers, when your students are answering questions, it's much easier to find exactly what you're looking for. And like right now, all of you are teaching everything. So you're spending this unbelievable amount of time, but most importantly, energy. So the reason why that was so difficult for you to do that, or why it was so difficult for us to do that, is we were always working toward concepts that maybe we didn't understand fully. But if we had worked at it from a question, then we would have had much better direction at looking at those resources and those materials. So under investigating, if you guys would, I'm going to give you 45 seconds because that's about how long it takes to read this. Take 45 seconds. No, actually, I'm going to do this one because I would rather you guys do it using evidence, communicating conclusions. Big thing in investigating. To me, that the most important part when I look at this is allow students to gain insight into compelling and supporting questions. That is the goal of investigating. But most importantly, investigating means it's the skill students need to analyze information and develop substantiated conclusions. It's everything you guys said in the chat a minute ago. You look for clues, right here where it says need to analyze information. You look for clues, you identify evidence. You guys said both of those. And then here where we said and develop substantiated conclusions, you're using the evidence. And a couple of you guys mentioned something to that effect. You collected data and you're going to make a determination. That is, even though we use different words in social studies, that's very much the same thing. Your students are going to look at information. They're going to analyze that information. They're going to study it. And over here where it says develop substantiated conclusions, they're going to give their position and you're going to make them use evidence to support it. Well, why, if Chastity were my student, I would look at Chastity. If she says that Abraham Lincoln, if we're reading something or we've got sources on Abraham Lincoln, and she says she thinks he's the greatest president, I'm going to look at Chastity and say, tell me why. Show me something you have read. Show me something you've watched, whatever it may be that tells you that he's the greatest president. Chastity, did you put something in the chat or did one of our folks put something in the chat?
Well, we do have one comment.
Okay.
So it's like inferencing. So you look for clues in the story, the picture or the text that give you ideas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And see, for us, whereas in reading, you're using those things for inference. In social studies, we use those for evidence because they support our position. We get to be just a little, and here sits Chastity in the meeting, our literacy woman. But the cool thing is about social studies is that we use that information a little bit differently. We come in saying, this is what we think, and I'm going to use this to support it. And you're not wrong. Or very, very seldom are you wrong. So see, there's just only slight difference, but it's kind of the same thing in reading, because when those kids read those questions and they go into the text to pull out the evidence, it's the same principle. It's the same idea, just like Chastity said a moment ago, same skill. So let's look at using evidence, speaking of which. So when you guys look at this one, and I'll do the last one, communicating conclusions, when you all look at using evidence, this is super important. And this is one that is student action. This is the one that I really wanted us to take some time to talk about. So I may have heard you guys through the other two a little bit. but this is the one that you need to think about for your students. Okay, yes, we do have using evidence standards, and all of these have standards, but I want to talk to you guys about the concept that it is student action. And using evidence is very much entwined with the reading and writing standards also. So when you guys look at this one, what for you, and just pop it into the chat, but if you guys would, under using evidence, as you read this, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to read it. Look at this. I'm even going to go on mute, but look at using evidence and identify what concepts that you see within this that you think is very important for the classroom. So I'm going to mute. Okay, so I see someone may have posted something there. Chastity. So what's something that you guys notice when you look at using evidence? What are our kids going to be expected to do?
So the big key takeaway is the logical evidence.
And logical means it makes sense to the student. You know, that student looks at that and says, I know this is true. I know that I'm right because this supports what I say. So for me, when I look at that, I see the whole thing, logical evidence. So that's great. Is there anything else that sticks out for anybody? Do you want to, you can open up your mic and say it out loud that way too. What's something else that you noticed when you looked at this?
It's kind of like the scientific method, using data to develop a hypothesis and prove it.
And notice there how it says, let me find it. What says students to collect, evaluate, and synthesize evidence. So that is, I'm thinking that's probably what really activated the scientific method for you. And that's, yeah, because we have to remember, social studies is a social science. So you're not wrong in saying that, because we both think the same way. We both use claim, evidence, and reasoning. So for those of you that are also doing science, guess what? You're going to have a chance also to practice a skill that is an expectation for your students. So this is another opportunity. Like I said a moment ago, this is finally social studies has caught up with everybody else. Hallelujah. So I want you guys to look at the one. This one can be a little bit intimidating, this part. This says this skill requires students to collect, evaluate, and synthesize evidence. That collection does not mean that they go out and get stuff. Now, you may get a little brave every now and then. You're saying, you know, telling your kids, bring in a primary source tomorrow. Talk to me before you do that. Okay, we'll talk later. But anyway, when you ask your student, you know, to look at collect means you have the sources in front of them, and they're going to collect by choosing the ones they want to use. There is so much more agency now, but see, that's going to be a very slow process to teach your kids, and you're going to see that today when I show you guys the lesson. So I want you, because all of our kids in social studies, this is such a new way to teach it. We're all new social studies teachers now because these are new standards. So I don't want you to feel intimidated in that respect. I had a tremendous amount of newness to this when they first came out, and I was on the standards writing committee. So when you think about evaluate means that they're going to look at them and actively choose the one that supports their argument. I keep talking about that skill. I can't emphasize that to you enough. You do it in reading, and you're looking at them and say, give me evidence, show me evidence. You're going to be saying that again. The only thing that's going to look different is the sources. The information that you put in front of them is going to have a social studies focus. And then look at the next one, synthesize the evidence. That just means bringing it together. That one is a bigger skill. You know, I have some high school teachers that have been talking to me about working with their students in terms of using evidence and bringing it all together. And notice I haven't even mentioned, but I'm going to now, COVID and the impact that it made, because it's made a significant amount of, you know, impact, obviously, because we have high school kids that, you know, like I mentioned a moment ago, you're talking about 10th grade. Well, think about that 10th grade. I think it was either 5th and 6th or 6th and 7th, basically virtually online. And those are really, really big years. Those are years when you really start actively using evidence, especially in social studies. So they've kind of missed that time. So they're still taking those baby steps. We're still scaffolding instruction and skills to support them in their skill development. And you're right. So it's very much like the scientific method. And then the bottom one, I love this one. Your kids are going to love it. Get creative, get fun with this. You know, in the past, we've thought about social studies and it was daunting for us. Oh my gosh, my kids have to take a test. My kids, have to take this, and I mean, you guys know your assessment. I'm not going to come to that part today or anything. And I was saying, your assessment, but I mean, the expectation for your kids. So when we look at this in terms of communicating conclusion, give your kids the opportunity to show their learning in lots of different ways. And for your kids, there's already a huge amount, and I really should say our kids. For our kids, that varies all the way across, a continuum, all the different ways that they could communicate their learning. If they want to draw a picture that shows their learning, absolutely, especially when they draw it. If they want to talk about it, or if they just want to write a caption with it or a small paragraph, perfect. Thinking about how does your government help you? If that kid wants to, draw, you can take a film if they wanted to. But if you're thinking about the picture that they're going to draw their community maybe and identify it. I'm already doing the question at the end, so I want to hush, but you guys know how they could show like ways in their community that government helps them. Or they might just show a picture of a government official doing something that's important to the community. That tells you that that student has developed that understanding of how our government helps us. Again, this is making our social studies learning much more palatable for our kids. It's not that you always have to come at this from memorizing, regurgitating, grading a test. These kids are really going to interact with social studies knowledge and information and being incredibly creative with it. So down here we look at, you can still use the traditional products, as it says in communicating conclusions, essays, reports, tables, diagrams, graphs, multimedia presentations. We all know that as Google Slides or PowerPoints, and discussions. But most importantly down here, as it says, students can also utilize newer media. Examples I always do at that point is Seesaw, Google Speak to Text. A lot of our assistive technology is very much, in line with that. As long as our students are able to communicate what they know, what they've learned, you're hitting that standard all over the place. So how do I develop an understanding of the what and how for my grade level? So these are some things I want to take you through really quickly, because especially for those of you that are new to the biz, but you maybe are teaching a new grade level or whatever it may be, you're still new. And just like I said a minute ago, we are all for the greatest part new. So these are the things I'm going to recommend that you go into. And that's why I said I wanted to focus on this in the grade. I'm only going to talk about this for about 5 minutes because I really want to spend a while on the lesson that I've developed. So the grade band, so these are the things, and all of these things, by the way, are going to be in your folder, because the grade band overview, grade level overview, geez, what this looks like in practice, those are going to be in your standards for K-8. High school, they do not exist for us. We do have the grade band overview, but that's it. And for you high school people, if you have any kind of questions about that, I'm happy to come back and talk about that. When you look at the disciplinary clarifications in the glossary, again, disciplinary clarifications, high school, yours is a separate document. For elementary K-8, yours is inside the document. And then also, if you guys will notice on your alternate assessment targets, there is the standard, and then there is the disciplinary clarification in those for those standards. And then of course the glossary is super important, and we'll talk about that one. Your grade band overview, what I'm going to ask you guys just to go in and look, and I know for many of you guys, you are your PLC, but going into the grade band overviews and looking at the expectation for your grade level. This is obviously grade K5, but for those of you that teach K5, this page is super duper important for you. Going in and see what it is that kindergarten has to know, grade 1, because you are this progression. So you can go into these. And what I love, and I didn't put the slide in here, just dawned on me. What I love about our standards is that each grade level, K5, and you guys will have to forgive me. I may have to, Chastity, I may have to come out at the very end and then go back in just to show you guys that each grade levels, there's been so many versions of this that I cannot believe I forgot that. But I want to make sure that you guys see that. For instance, kindergarten is me, myself, and my community. Grade 1 is me, my community, and my state. So they're looking at Kentucky. The second grade is North America. Third grade is global interactions. Then you get in 4th grade, and it's migration and settlement. And then 5th grade is colonial to constitution. We're going to go into that in just a second, and you're going to see it. So the grade specific overview, and here's an example of the grade 7 one. So for those of you that work K-8, or maybe you teach middle school, but I think, more than likely you may be K-8. When you look at this, and I'm going to minimize this for just a second. When you're looking at this, how might this grade level specific overview be useful to you in your role to understand what to teach? So here is coming to look at that general focus. And I'm going to talk to you about that when we talk about 5th grade, because I'm going to be showing you a 5th grade lesson. Go into this to see the framework that you're going to place your students learning in. It's going to give you an idea, and I'm just going to say this out loud. I'm going to answer this question for you guys. It's going to give you ideas of what curriculum to look at if you're thinking about purchasing something, or if you have found something online and you think, oh, this might be pretty good. Come here into this grade specific overview to look at, this introduction, to see what the expectation is, to look at the key vocabulary. And if you're not seeing those things, and then something else I love about this is looking back, looking ahead. Again, super important for you guys, because many times, if not every time, you teach multiple grades. So that grade band and this grade specific overview are incredibly valuable for you guys. So just to help you out here, this is where you're going to find the K-5 overview. Again, you guys are going to have this PowerPoint, so you can come back to this to find these numbers. There's the middle school and there's the high school. Again, high school, we're always going to fall a little bit short on that one. And I've got an idea in my head to work on some stuff for high school to help and support you all. So here's an example right here, which is colonial to constitution. So this is the 5th grade example. And what I wanted to show you guys here is the whole idea in 5th grade. So look at that top sentence that's highlighted in the beige color. Examining the conflict and compromise that resulted from migration and settlement to understand the tensions and factors that led to the fight for independence and the establishment of the United States. So as you teach your 4th grade kids, which is migration and settlement, that means getting everybody to North America, plus the people who already live here, okay? Showing how they all end up together because of migration and settlement. And so we get them here. And then with 5th grade, and this is why 4th and 5th grade work so beautifully together, with 5th grade, you're going to understand now that we're all together and we are all on this continent together. There's times it's really good and times it's really bad, just to kind of sit there. So we have conflict and compromise. So you can think of it in terms of that. If it is in blue, and this is something that I neglected to mention a minute ago, and it's going to be super important if you guys are here. I'm going to go back. Don't forget, or I forgot, you did not. Please remember, civics, when you see blue, light blue, that means you're looking at a civic standard or a civics concept. Geography is going to be green, economics is yellow, and history is purple, because you can't do red. So blue and red mixed makes purple. So that's the way that I always kind of think about it. So here's where you're going to find those overviews. So going back to this one, what you're going to teach or focus for 5th grade, students will analyze the development and establishment of the U.S. federal government. That gives you a super duper focus. It's going to be all about establishing the federal government. So that gives you an idea of when you're looking around at curriculum, that civics focus really gives you a lot of leeway. It gives you a lot of leverage to really get out there and start looking at materials. So your economics focus, students will describe why the government collects taxes and what goods and services it provides society. Again, every time you come to that, when you look at your target standards and these other standards as you incorporate them, always think in terms of why does the government take our money and how do they help us when they take that money. Students will analyze how cultural, economic, and environmental factors encouraged and restricted the movement of people, ideas, and goods. In your goodie bag for being here today, we're going to give you a tool that's going to really help you do that one. And students will describe the impact of foundational documents. Your students are going to interact with some of these foundational documents. In 8th grade, again, you guys can kind of see here, and let's just look at the economics one. Students will assess how regions of the United States specialize based on supply and demand. And these focuses, knowing how your students are going to work within these themes, is really going to help you in determining how you're going to teach your kids and what you're going to teach your kids. So you're not going to have to go into a million different directions. So the 5th grade theme, and this is going to finish with this so that we can go into the lesson. The 5th grade theme is colonial to constitution. So it's an economic focus in this case for me right now. I'm going to use this when I'm working with my kids. So students will describe why the government collects taxes and what goods and services it provides society. Our lesson today is going to be part of this. So the standard I'm looking at, which is one of your target standards, which is 5E MA1. E is economics, MA is macroeconomics, which means the big economics. When it's micro, that's going to be personal and those things that we touch personally as a consumer. Macro is how all of the economy is established and how it runs so that we as populations can interact in that larger economy, okay? So in this case, it says example for instruction. Identifying services in your community provided by the government, state and federal, to describe how they, the government, impact our daily lives, helping citizens, and you use excerpts from the Constitution plus some other things, and we're going to look at this one specifically. So this gives you an idea. This is no limitations. So every opportunity that we have with our kids to show how the government is interacting with their lives, it can even be with, if a new law is passed, you can bring that new law in with your kids and talk about potentially how it interacts with their lives or how it interacts with your life. Your kids care about you and love you. So if there's a law that's passed that greatly, impacts you or your children or your life in any way, share that with your kids. That's just a teachable moment, especially because there's going to be primary and secondary sources that are produced in that moment for you to use to teach your students about that or to connect your students with it. But let's go into a sample lesson in just a second that'll go deeper into that. There's another section in your standards, and I'm going to move this over, and that is what this would look like in practice. So going here, and this is an opportunity for you to do a little professional learning. You can learn more about how to interact with your kids with these standards from this angle, and it's also going to really help you see that big connection between reading and writing and social studies. The disciplinary clarifications are huge. They're already in, I'm pretty sure I know this one. I mean, I know it's in 5th and 8th grade. I got to go back and look at the high school again. But when you go into your standards and you're looking at your target standard, and let's say, for instance, especially one of those that says no limitations, you come into your disciplinary clarifications. K8, it is part of your document. In high school, and again, you're going to have this, you click here because it's a separate document. You can come into this, for instance, I've got to go back and look for middle school. I don't want to look, but let's say, for instance, this standard says evaluate the rights, roles, responsibilities, and limitations of the citizen. Okay, but this one is for, for 6th grade, and it may be in your progression. You can come over here with ideas of how to teach that. This document really gives you direction in terms of choosing your curriculum and your resources very carefully. So this is an incredibly valuable tool. So your glossary that I'm putting in your all's folder, very important. If there is a term that you need to know, if there is a term inside a standard, or if there is a concept, like in terms of this one, absolute location, if this is something that's within your standards that you have to teach, this is the place to come get the definition. This definition is as much for you as it is for the students. This is how, and I know that many times in terms of Lexile and things like that, that you're going to want to break this down so the students can read it and understand it, which is great. But we always have to give them the original, because this is going to be in terms of equity and access. We have to make sure that they also get the original and they understand this concept, because there's some words that we can't let them lose, like geographic in this case. If you're giving this, is the exact geographic spot where something is located, and practice it, practice it, practice it. Our kids have got, and this is across the board, K-12, no matter the grade level, no matter, okay? They have got to be interacting with geography at least 3 days a week. Every opportunity we can give our kids to locate, even if it's sometimes practicing the same location, like where their school is and then where their house is. And then you can build on that. But again, it's just about practice, practice for them to understand absolute location. And then later on, you'll see relative location. But in this case, you're going to see chain of supply. You're going to see that term again. Again, you can access the glossary here, but it's also going to be in your folder. So we're going to just deconstruct. And so what I would like for you guys to do is to flip that sheet of paper over that you've been writing on. I notice that some of you guys are on your phones, you're driving. I want this to come from you guys. And at one point, I'm actually going to come out of this and type into the screen in front of you guys. We're going to sit down like a PLC and we're going to deconstruct, because this is what I want to recommend for you guys. Sit down not only with your assessment, your alternate assessment targets, but also those other standards that you're engaging with as you bring them in to those lessons, because you're going to see those supports. Because we have social studies standards. I cannot remember how many per grade level. Don't ask me at the top of my head at the moment. I know kindergarten has 26. That's about it. So we look at this. So what we're going to look at standard 5CPR1. This is one of your target standards also. So evaluate whether various rules and laws promote the general welfare using historical and contemporary examples. So on that piece of paper I told you to flip over, I want you to make 4 columns. Or you can even, columns are preferred, but if you want to do 4 boxes, it's up to you. But I want you guys to see the progression that we're going to take this thing through. So this is the first column. We're just going to write the standard down. Okay. And that is evaluate. And if some of you guys are driving and you want to come back and watch this, especially to look at this one section, feel free to do that, because I know that this is going to be on the holler. So we're going to write down the standard, evaluate whether various rules and laws promote the general welfare using historical and contemporary examples. Let's go ahead and go into the next one. This is the one where I'm actually going to come out of it. I'm going to keep it on the screen and we're going to do this one together. So your second column is identify the knowledge, vocabulary, concepts the students need. And by the way, this standard, let me go back to it, is with no limitations. That's why I chose this one, because I think it's incredibly important that we do this. This is no limitations. So let me go back to this slide. So we're going to write in the second column. So this is you guys. So Chastity, just let me know. So I want to ask you guys, when you look at this standard, what's something that in terms of knowledge, vocabulary, or a concept that you feel the students are going to need to know? And I'll go ahead and start you off, which is really, okay, I won't use that one. I'm going to use general welfare. I know that I am really going to have to make a word wall in my classroom to teach social studies, or they're going to have their own person, or they're also with it going to have their own personal word wall, and it may have to have pictures with it, so they know when I say that word, they can point to that picture and they tell me they know. It can be anything that they can do to let me know that they know what that concept means. So I'm going to have to define general welfare. I noticed somebody's got something in the chat. Chastity, is that you, or does somebody else have another example?
We do have it's rules and laws.
Yes. So we're going to put those separately because rules and laws are different. So absolutely.
Historical is contemporary.
Okay.
Or versus, historical versus contemporary.
Good. So we're going to show our kids, if it's historical, that means it's in the past. In my mind, and I would do this with like elementary kids, I can just see it. There's lots of opportunities. And again, this may be one of the little videos I do, but to get our littlest ones, K2, to really understand the past, there is some really unique and very easy questioning that we can use to get them to look at it that way. But yes, historical versus contemporary. Is there anything else we need to look at there that we need our kids to know? So if they're looking at general welfare, what's a document that you know right off the bat that is in? When we say that word, because I know you all know the song, We the People, and I'm not going to sing. But now that I've said it, for those of us that grew up with Schoolhouse Rock, I know you did it the minute I said it. You guys are singing it. It's an earworm. I know it. But anyway, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. So what document does that come from?
You have preamble, United States Constitution. Absolutely.
Get y'all one of those fake copies of the Constitution. Your kids should be able to look at it and know that that's the Constitution every time they see it. Okay, bam. So absolutely, there's going to be some other things that your kids need to know. So this is your second column. The first column. So right here, this is in the first column. And the second column, we've just identified some of those things that your kids are going to need to know and color-coded that. So let's go to the third column. So I want you to look to the verb and write that in the third column. And I went ahead and wrote that for you guys. Evaluate. So what does it mean to evaluate? To judge or determine the significance or worth, assess. most of the time with our kids. And I like to write down a definition with that. All right. So if our kids are going to judge or assess, so here's another chance to pop that in there. Okay. If our kids are getting the opportunity to judge or assess, and this is what I want you to mull around your head, or determine the significance or worth. Okay. So especially in terms of looking at the standard, what are we going to get our kids to think about? You guys did a great job right here. So here's the skills. Okay. I mean, not skills, but here's the knowledge, the vocabulary, the concepts, and they're going to apply those in terms of they're going to judge, they're going to assess. So what we're asking our kids to do, and we're going to build up in that skill, we're going to scaffold that, because we know that when we look at the standard, there's all kinds, and I'm going to do that for you guys in just a second with one of these. So we're going to be able to look at those progressions. If you guys would write down page 155, our inquiry progressions are first, and then it goes into our civics. Write down 155 so you know what the progressions are in the big standards document. So what I want to do really quickly is, so now we know we've just deconstructed this, but let's go a little bit deeper into that deconstruction. So when we talk about what skill do the kids have, so in terms of evaluating, okay, and notice here I put to judge, and I really should have made assess also in bold. We're going to ask them to determine how federal laws protect or serve the people of the country, and that's to promote the general welfare. When you look at that, that's to protect, that's to serve, to make sure we're happy. Okay, that whole thing of course, it's in another document about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and what this looks like in your community, state, or nation when it happens. So you can find multiple examples, and that's the contemporary part. We know the historical are those in the past. So when has the government, established a practice or a law or a rule that promoted calm, happy, successful communities that were good for the people? And sometimes they didn't. And that's what we're going to talk about. And go back to this again, judging or determining the significant, or assessing. Sometimes they did it and it didn't work as well as we had hoped. So there's going to be times that the kids are going to have, when you do those contemporary historical examples, sometimes you're going to have kids that say, but it didn't work, did it? And you're going to say, why do you say that? Show me evidence. So some examples would be interstate highway construction. I mean, we can get around all over the place. That would be a federal thing, federal laws. And there's laws that people ask every day for more laws to be created, and again, you can talk to your kids about that. Bring those examples in. And you guys know some of those, even though some of those may be, political hotspots, you're not going to talk about it from that perspective. You can even ask your kids, what is a law that you think needs to be created? It can be a local law. What is a local law that you think we need to have? What is a state law that you think we need to have? We can have our kids actually thinking into the future or into the need of the community. And that is phenomenal social studies thinking. And what it looks like when it happens in your community. So I don't know what this thing's doing again. So examples of other ways would be, there we go. Not going to touch it. Speed limits. Rest areas are actually a state thing. That's why sometimes you can go to different states, but it's really cool to kind of maybe I'm trying to give you guys examples that you're like, we could kind of talk about that. Rest areas are done by the state. So that means like some states, when you go to them, they're really, really nice. And some they're just kind of industrial. And other places, they may be a little sparse. Law enforcement, again, there is a level that we have for, like, again, federal, state, local. So law enforcement, anything, because that protects us. And I see that we've got a comment there. What's that one, Chastity?
It says, for middle school, we focus on how the civic duty of voting impacts local, state, federal laws, policy, etc.
Yes. And so looking at that, I love that. All right. So we got to remember our questions as we read to the inquiry practices. We need questions, sources, and tasks. And no one knows your kids better than you. So what that has to look like. But when you plan a unit, you guys can kind of see right here, we got to have some civics, some economics, some geography, and some history all mixed together in that unit. We no longer just do economics, civics, geography, the whole kind of thing. We mix all of them together, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So that's the new part. And you're like, oh my gosh. So let me show you what that looks like. So in my little mini unit that I'm doing, I have chosen 2 standards at one time, got them identified here. You guys can see them. These are actually part of your target, and there are no limitations. They are part of your alternate assessment targets. I will put in the folder. There are 2 other standards that we are teaching with this one, but I just wanted to throw up your targets for this one. And so what does this look like in instruction? So so my compelling question, and I'm going to get my picture way over here out of the way. So how does the government help us? I told you guys that question a little while ago. So we're going to stage the question. We're going to get our kids thinking about that. We're going to ask their opinions, how they think that they help us. So what I'm going to make sure I do, Chastity, if you can just yell and scream at me and let me know, I don't know what this thing is doing. So I'm going to go through and now notice one question is different. Ooh, it's magic. So 3 of the questions I'm going to use is going to be, what is the Constitution? Now, this is not all my questions, because I told you guys, remember, our compelling question organizes our unit. There it is. Our kids are going to work toward that all the time. We're not going to keep saying concepts out loud. We're going to keep saying compelling questions out loud. Then we're going to have day 1, day 2, day 3. You guys can see those. What is the Constitution? What are public services? You guys, for our kids, their learning is that targeted. We want them to really kind of get into that. Who pays for our public services? Bam, right there it is. So I want you guys to look at this. Tell me why, knowing how the disciplines, and that's what we call them in social studies, the disciplines, the 4 disciplines: civics, geography, economics, history. Which disciplines are being focused on different days? So if somebody please tell me in the chat there, what disciplines are being focused on in these 3 days of instruction? Anybody just try, you guys. Which discipline was blue and which discipline was yellow? I'll give you a hint. And we got to hurry because I have like
civic duty is paying tax.
Civics, and with taxes, what discipline does that go under? That would be, and by the way, Chastity, let me know who that was. That would be what?
Civics.
We pay taxes, but taxes impact our, think yellow. Which discipline is yellow? Now think of the standards I used. I'll go back and show you real fast. I gave you a hint. Oh, I should not have done that, because this will be 1,000 I have to go through. Look at the 2 standards I used: a civics and an
economics.
Yes, good job. Was that you, Chastity, that guessed that one, or just somebody put that in there?
A Bartley.
Thank you. Is that Angie? Okay, so let me show you what one day looks like. So now you guys saw part of a unit. Okay, this is the unit, and notice here it says supporting questions, direct daily learning. So you guys, you'll teach, and you guys, some of these are going to take you 2 or 3 days to teach. These, and by the way, there really is a book that's called Paying Taxes, a True Book. It's completely informational. I have 1 minute, and I'm going to hustle. Good thing that this one is really close to the end. So I chose the day, who pays for our public services. So you're going to actually have to, in between there, spend a day talking about public service or public property, private property kind of thing, or, get the kids distinguished, because you've already done that really in one class. So that being said, source A, Paying Taxes, a True Book. You can actually, by the way, get this read. You can you can go on YouTube and they actually have this. Then excerpts from the Constitution, very small, very teeny tiny. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution talks about paying taxes, why we do that. So you can copy that little excerpt, and again, that's definitely going to be one that you're going to have to change the lexile for the kids. So use evidence to develop claims in response to compelling and supporting questions. You're teaching a using evidence standard. Yay. And look, that's supposed to be RI, by the way. RI. Quote accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. Look at that, using reading and writing. I have just 20 seconds. So here you guys will see, I want to show you guys the economics progression. This one's really important. If you'll bear with me an extra 40 seconds or 45 seconds, I'll hurry. I want you guys to see this, because while down here, you're talking with the kids about collecting taxes and what goods and services it provides, because I know you're going to have all abilities okay, in your classroom, and most importantly, you're gonna have all grades. What does it look like for kindergarten when they start talking about this? And again, you can scaffold this, maybe with your kids. That's identifying places in the community that provide goods and services. So you see, you can build this, describe how different jobs as well as public and private institutions help people in the community, identify the cost of everyday common goods, differentiate between private and public. Notice how I said that a second ago, didn't even think about that. Compare and contrast different ways that the government interacts with the economy. And then the last one there, why the government collects taxes and what goods and services it provides. So again, thinking about historical, going back to the civics question, historical and contemporary examples, again, using those, you're actually going to end up talking about economic examples. I'm going to hush. If you have any questions, here's my name and my number. Oh my gosh, but not my email. I've got to put my email in there. So you got my cell phone number. Text me and I'll send you my email. But I'm going to hush right there. So anything that you guys need, hopefully this was a bare bones introduction into these standards. I'm available to you guys just about any time. If I'm not available immediately, I will make time and get you on my calendar and we can actually talk one-on-one and I can help you. Or if a couple of you guys work together a whole bunch and you want me to meet with both of you, I'm happy to do that. Thank you all so much for being patient with me and this crazy computer.
Thank you, Kim, so much. We appreciate Kim joining us today. We love Kim. She, as you all can tell, she is not only a guru of social studies, but that is her passion. She loves it, and you can tell. So, like she said, she would be willing to do anything that you need her to do. She's wonderful. We do want to thank you guys for joining us today. And if you guys have any questions at all, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you guys so much. You all have a great evening.